Welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson, and this is an episode which is meant to encourage you to look for the Magonomia Beastery Kickstarter and throw money at Andrew. Each of the extra episodes contains the backstory for one of the creatures which I contributed to the Beastery, and this time, the demonic wrestler of Cornwall, which I've called Kennajack. Kennajack's actually the name of the place he comes from, the Hooting Cairn. Hooting is because of the sound he makes. This demon has shown up on the blog before, briefly in some of the Cornish Ars Magica material. I only gave a synopsis of his story then, so here's the full one from Hunt's Romances of the West of England. It begins with a quote from an even earlier book, in which a version of our demon can be seen. A weird tract is that of Kennedick and the Gump, and of ill repute, the old half-starved horses on the common, with their hides grown rusty brown like dried and withered grass by exposure, are ridden by the archfiend at night. He is said to hunt lost souls over the heath, and an old stile hard by bears an evil name, for the souls are sure to be caught there, none able to get over it. The people tell of midnight fights by demons, and of a shadowy form holding a lantern to the combatants. And that's a quote from Blight. I did try and find that back when I was doing the Ars Magica material. I'm not quite sure who he is. And now over to Hunt. One of the tales which I have heard may be given as a strange mixture of the Celtic and monastic legend. Two miners had been working in one of the now abandoned mines in Morva, and had, their labours being over, as was common, been half-pinting in the public house in Morva Churchton. It was after dark, but not late, and they were very quiet men and not drunk. They had walked on, talking of the prospects of the mine and speculating on the promise of certain pitches, and were now on the common at the base of the Hooting Cairn. No miner ever passed within the shadow of Cairn Kesedic, who dared indulge in any frivolous talk. At least 30 years since, the influence akin to fear was very potent upon all. Well, our two friends became silent, and trudged with a firm resolved step forward. There was but little wind, but a low moaning sound came from the cairn, which now and then arose into a hoot. The night was dark, yet a strange gleaming light rendered the rocks on the cairn visible, and both the miners fancied they saw gigantic forms passing in and about the intricate rocks. Presently they heard a horse galloping at no great distance behind them. They turned and saw mounted on a horse, which they knew very well, since the bony brute had often worked at the whim of the mine, a dark-robed man in a black gown with a hood over his head, partly covering his face. "Hello, hello," they shouted, fearing the rider would ride over them. "Hello to you," answered a gruff voice. "Where bist going, then?" said the bravest of the miners. "Up to the cairn to see the wrastlin'," answered the rider. "Come along, come along." Horse and rider rushed by the two miners, and they could never tell why, they found themselves compelled to follow. They did not appear to exert themselves, but without much effort they kept up with the galloping horse. Now and then the dark rider motioned them onward with his hand, but spoke not. At length the miners arrived at a mass of rocks near the base of the hill, which stopped their way, and since it was dark, they knew not how to get past them. Presently they saw the rider ascending the hill regardless of the masses of rock, passing unconcernedly over all, and as it seemed to them, the man, the horse, and the rocks were engaged in a three-man song. A chorus, to which there was a piercing hoot. A great number of uncouth figures were gathered about, coming, as it seemed, out of the rocks themselves. They were men of great size and strength, with savage faces, rendered more terrible by the masses of uncombed hair which hung about them, and the colours which they had painted their cheeks. The plain in front of the rocks, which had checked the miners' progress, was evidently to be a wrestling ground. Here gathered these monstrous-looking men, all anxiety, making a strange noise. It was not long ere they saw the rider, who was now on foot, descending the hill with two giants of men, more terrible than they had yet seen. A circle was formed. The rider, who had thrown off his black gown, and discovered to the riders that he was none other than Old Nick, placed the two men and seated himself in a very odd manner upon the ground. The miners declared that the wrestlers were no other than two devils, although the horns and tails were wanting. There was a shout, which, as if it indicated that the light was insufficient, was answered by the squatting demon by flashing from his eyes two beams of fire, which shed an unearthly glow over everything. To it the wrestlers went, and better men were never seen to the west of Penzance. At length one of them, straining hard for mastery, lifted his antagonist fairly high in the air and flung him to the ground, a fair backfall. The rocks trembled, and the ground seemed to thunder with the force of the fall. Old Nick sat quietly, looking on, and notwithstanding the defeated wrestler lay as one dead, no one went to him. All crowded round the victor and shouted like many wild beasts. The love of fair play was strong in the hearts of the miners, and they scorned the idea of deserting a fallen foe, so they scrambled over the rock and made for the prostrate giant, for so for size he might well be called. He was in a dreadful strait. Whether his bones were smashed or not by the fall, they could not tell, but he appeared to be passing away. The elder miner had long been a professor of religion. It is true he had fallen back, but still he knew the right road. He thought, therefore, the devil might repent, and he whispered in the ear of the dying man the Christian's hope. If a thunderbolt had fallen amongst them, it could not have produced such an effect as this. The rocks shook with an earthquake, and everything became pitchy dark. There was a noise of rushing hither and thither, and all were gone, dying man and all, they knew not whither. The two miners, terrified beyond measure, clung to each other on the knees, and while in this position they saw, as it were from the air, the two blazing eyes of the demon passing away into the west, and at last disappearing in a dreadfully black cloud. These two men were, although they knew the ground perfectly well, inextricably lost. So after vainly endeavouring to find the right road of the common, they lay down in each other's arms under a mass of granite rock, praying that they might be protected till the light of day removed the spell which was upon them. Your saga may vary.